So listen, Alan's been doing this 18 years. Clearly, he has not been doing it online 18 years, but I love Alan. That's why I hired him some 40 years ago when I was at the House Hair Institute. And I'd been there 4 or 5 years and I loved it. It was so great. We predated cochlear implants, because implants were approved, I guess, for adults in 86. And I had just left the year before, left House. And, we already had hundreds of patients with cochlear implants by the time the FDA had approved it. And I was running the intraoperative cranial nerve monitoring program, and it was a real problem to find somebody who was able, competent, interested in that area. And Alan walked in the door, and I think I lassoed him. I just you, and he said, "Dude, I love this stuff," and he took it to levels that I never did. So, Alan and I've known each other a long time. Um, I want to speak today about issues, innovation, and outcomes in over-the-counter hearing aids. And I know most of you probably don't love over-the-counter hearing aids, and there's some good reasons for that, and there's some interesting thoughts and protocols that have occurred, and some outcomes, peer-reviewed outcomes that have shown that in the right situation for the right patient at the right time, the right product can be very, very useful. I'm going to tell you my general thought as far as OTC goes right now. So this is, of course, October, what's today, the 3rd, I guess, or the 4th, whatever it is. And, this at this time in life, I think we're past the mixing point. We're past the pivot point. Consumer electronics and medical electronics have become merged. And we may like that, we may not like that, but I think it's reality. You can do your pulse and your blood pressure on a little thing you can buy for $99 and get an EKG, right? And it's pretty accurate. You can get all sorts of monitoring devices for falls, for temperature, for blood pressure, for glucose, all sorts of things. And then you don't need a prescription for most of them. And it's not like they're bad or evil. They're not. They're challenging because sometimes, people want to replace their audiologist or their doctor or their OBGYN or their hearing aid dispenser with an app. And that's the Dr. Google approach. Well, there might be some merit in that, but I don't think we're there yet. I don't think we're there. I think what I want to say, and what I say in all of my articles, is I really believe that we should stop doing hearing screenings as audiologists. And here's why. Hear me out. When we do a screening, it facilitates in the patient the thought that you can be screened and get an accurate result and a meaningful result, and maybe a diagnosis and maybe a treatment plan based on a screening. The fact of the matter is, and I have a brand new article coming out in ASHA in November, December, The Leader, where I document all this. But the bottom line is this: that 20% of people who are screened, who fail screenings, 20% of people who fail hearing screenings will ever seek help. 80% think, I hear what I want to hear. My hearing is fine. I have selective hearing. If it's not important, I don't hear it. All of which means I have hearing loss and I don't want to admit it. Why don't I want to admit it? Why don't I? Because if you admit you have hearing loss, then you're sort of locked into doing something about it. Or you could just be a knucklehead and do nothing. But, so people don't want to have to do anything about it. And they don't want to have to spend the money. And most importantly, they don't want the look of a hearing aid. And I say that after 42 years as an audiologist. Many of us will say, boy, your hearing loss is more visible than your hearing aid. But that's just really not true. When you read the data, and I do urge you to read the most current demographics, and the most current ones I'm aware of are the Global Burden of Disease study, which was published in 2024 in Ear and Hearing. And, it's peer reviewed by an excellent editorial board. And they said this, you probably learned there were 38 or 40 million people in the USA with hearing loss. Guess what? 72.88 million people in the USA have hearing loss. 72.88 million. Let's round it up to 73. And then you have the article that Jeff Danhauer and I published, in 2019, peer-reviewed, saying there were 26 million Americans who have no hearing loss whatsoever. Their thresholds are essentially normal. Yet, they would have hearing difficulty. They would complain about speech and noise. They're not doing well in day-to-day, listening situations. So let's take the global burden of disease number of 73 million and add the 26 million that Jeff and I said have no hearing loss, but they have difficulty hearing, listening. And that's about 100 million people. So it's really 1 out of 3 Americans. In the global burden of disease study, if you just use that, it's 1 out of 5. And we used to say, oh, 1 out of 15, 1 out of 20, no, none of that's the issue anymore. And you could argue with me. Some people argue and say, oh, I don't believe those stats. Well, okay, but it's Dr. Hill's and it's global burden of disease study. And so I take it as real. So about 100 million Americans who have hearing and listening difficulty. What's the difference? Well, hearing is, as you know, a matter of thresholds and loudness and amplitude. Listening is comprehending sound. Listening is the ability to make sense out of sound. So it's a very, very different world right now. And then you go to Larry Hume's work, 2023, I think Larry published this. And it's a brilliant study where he says 80 to 85% of people who have a need to hear better will never do anything about it. So if you have, virtually let's say 73 million people with hearing loss and another 26 million with listening disorders. So we got 100 million people, 80% of them, 85% are never going to do anything. That means that, only about 15 million will do something about it and about 80 to 85 million won't. And so we kind of need a better solution for people, or we could just say, well, screw it. If they don't want to, seek our help and our brilliance and our um, treatment options, then they're on their own. Well, they don't want to seek ours, and they don't want our traditional solutions. And now they have OTC, so they're not really on their own. So that I think it's important to kind of set that stage. I always, always, always tell people you need a comprehensive audiometric evaluation. I never say a hearing screening. I just wrote a paper. You could Google it. Go to Journal of Otolaryngology ENT Research, JOENTR, and put in diabetes Beck. And you'll see my brand new paper on this. And I argue in there the same thing, that when physicians, if they're concerned about hearing, which they should be for diabetes, but many are not, if they order a hearing screening, they're not going to find any diabetic impact most of the time, because of course, where does the impact occur? Well, it starts at the very high frequencies, right? 20,000, 19, 18, 17, 16, 15, 14, 13, 12, 11, 10, 9,000 hertz gets, hit first, but we don't even test that most of the time. I do have another article coming out in Hearing Tracker. I think it's coming out in January, with two of my brilliant colleagues talking about how we should be doing extended bandwidth in every patient every time. And people say, well, why would you do that since hearing aids don't go out to 14,000, 16, 18? Well, because first of all, it's about diagnosis, right? Diagnosis first, treatment second. And when we talk about diagnosis first, we don't want to just say sensorineural hearing loss presbycusis. What we want to do is actually be much more accurate. A study out of Harvard in 2024 was very clear that auditory neuropathy and cochlear synaptopathy happen before outer hair cell damage. What we all learned, right, 45 years ago when I was in my master's program, what we all learned, right, is that outer hair cell damage at 8K, that's what defines hearing loss, right? When it's 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, then we have hearing loss. But why did we ignore 20,000 to 12,000? Oh, 20,000 to 8,000. Oh, there's no speech information there. Well, first of all, there's some speech information up to about 10 or 12,000 hertz. But second of all, it's not just speech information. We're looking at the acoustics. We're looking at the psychoacoustics. We're looking at interaural loudness differences. We're looking at interaural timing differences. We're looking at head shadow effect. We're looking at the ability to estimate distance based on how, what sounds you're perceiving. And we know that many people with extended bandwidth, high frequency loss will complain about tinnitus. And sometimes, if you're looking at 12, 14, 16,000 hertz with extended bandwidths, you'll see a patient might have considerably more hearing loss in the right than the left. And by the way, they're complaining about right ear tinnitus. Why would that be? Well, probably auditory neuropathy, but could be cochlear synaptopathy. There's a lot of things that we just take as normal clinical things that really should be investigated. So I don't believe in hearing screenings with this sole exception of universal newborn infant hearing screening, which I think is essential to life and health. I think absolutely 100% yes. Hearing screenings, if done by a nurse or a technician or somebody like that, fine. High school, guidance counselor wants to do hearing screenings or something, great. But when you and I do it, I think it really diminishes us and the patient because, you know, and I've used this example before, but if I did a hearing screening on a 71-year-old patient, comes in and I test them at, you know, 500, 1K, 2K, 4K, and they pass all of those frequencies, I'm going to say, Mr. Smith, you passed a screening. What's Mr. Smith going to say when he gets home? He's going to say, well, I saw Dr. Beck and he said my hearing's normal. And that's the problem. And well, there's more problems than that. Then the other thing is, you know, all of these people with cochlear synaptopathy, all of these people with auditory neuropathy, all of these people with listening disorders, with speech and noise complaint, with hearing disorders, not going to find any of them because we did a silly screening. And I do think, you know, I mean, I understand that screenings are done for marketing purposes here and there, and you know, I don't want to say that that's bad. That's up to whoever's doing it. But what I would say is a better marketing approach to hearing impaired patients is probably to say something like this. Do people seem to mumble? Do you have difficulty understanding in noisy environments? Do you have difficulty with speech and noise? Do you have difficulty understanding family gatherings, cocktail parties, restaurants? Do you have ringing in your ears? Those things I think will bring in just as many patients as a free screening. Again, 80% of the people who fail screenings, who are told you need a comprehensive audiometric eval, they don't do it. So I'm kind of thinking it's a waste of our time, and it gives a patient false hope if they pass the screening. Had you done speech and noise testing, had you done extended bandwidths, you would have found their problem, and then you could start addressing it. And you know, you can't find what you don't look for. So I think, you know, it's incumbent on us to do a better job. And really, I don't care if you follow AAA, ASHA, or IHS best practices, but follow one of them. And they all say communication and listening assessments are highly recommended. They all say speech and noise testing is recommended. And you know, we just we just don't do it. And I understand, you know, there's economics involved. And oh, it took another 4 minutes to do a speech and noise test. Yeah, well, you know, I think it's 4 minutes well spent. So you can disagree. It's okay. I won't tell you you're wrong. Don't tell me I'm wrong because we all have opinions. And I'm just saying best practices solves all of these problems most of the time. So I do want to disclose for the last year or so, I'm a full-time employee. Once again, I gave up on retirement. I tried retiring. I don't like it. The pay isn't as good, you know, so that's an issue. And Medicare ain't all it's cracked up to be, just so you know. Nuance audio glasses are FDA cleared over-the-counter hearing aid product, and I am the Senior Director of Audiology for EssilorLuxottica. If you haven't heard of them, they do make Meta, Ray-Ban Meta, they make Oakley Meta, they make Nuance audio glasses, and they're the world's largest frames and lens manufacturer. They're in Milan and Paris and all over the States. So I want to disclose that because I'm going to talk about them a little bit. It's not going to be a sales thing, but the reason I'm going to talk about them a little bit is because I published a couple of peer-reviewed papers on that product, which I want to share with you when we talk about peer-reviewed stuff in over the counter. Also, everything depends on everything, right? When you have large epidemiologically based epidemiologic based studies, they may or may not apply to you or your patient, right? We could say, you know, 85% of all people are over 5 feet tall. And I'm making this up. I don't know if that's true or not. But that doesn't tell you anything about the patient in front of you. They may be taller, they may be shorter. You could say whatever. But large studies are important because they tell you the general trend of the population. But keep in mind, they don't tell you about the specific patient in front of you. Science evolves. It is dynamic. It is not static. It does not stay the same. And what we know to be true today may be less true or actually wrong tomorrow. Peer-reviewed literature is not a guarantee that it will always be correct. Peer review just means it's the best scientific opinion from a jury of your peers, and they have read it and commented and critiqued it or accepted it or rejected it. So when we talk about peer-reviewed stuff, it's important that we base our opinions as scientists, as doctors, as audiologists, as dispensers, you know, on peer-reviewed stuff because that's the most credible information we have. I'm not a fan of white papers. You know, I've written quite a few of them, as you probably know, but you know, that's a manufacturer saying, here's what we think. And you know, that's okay. I mean, they're not all BS, they're not all lies or any such thing, but it is a, you know, an opinion from somebody who has you know, a dog in that fight. If you wrote the same white paper as a peer-reviewed paper, that means people who don't have a dog in that fight have reviewed it and have agreed that it's worthy. So When manufacturers offer white papers, I think you should read them, but I think you have to, you know, put your opinion of that on hold until you see a jury of your peers say the same thing, and that would mean it's peer reviewed. All right. So trends in, I'm trying to get rid of this thing here. Okay, trends in hearing prosthetics and factors in, and I want you to know is just about all the papers that I'm going to share with you are 2024, 2025. Okay. So this is some of the newest information we have. This was a beautiful study, May of 2025. And what the authors said is the key to effective hearing prosthesis, right, hearing products, hearing stuff, consists not only in the adequate adjustment of the hearing aid, but also in the patient's positive attitude to the treatment, the duration of daily use of the device. Over the counter hearing aids may have a positive impact on increasing the number of hearing impaired people using hearing aid products. Well, this is important because, the attitude, I shared it with you guys years ago, those of you who have been attending seminars and hearing religiously, that I never believed much about affordability and accessibility being the key barriers to hearing aid acquisition. I have thought for many, many years the key barrier is the form factor. Nobody wants to be that guy with hearing aids over their ear. Nobody, I've told hundreds, if not thousands of patients, Mr. Jones, you do have a fairly substantial high frequency loss. And the reason that it sounds like everybody's mumbling, the reason you can't understand speech in difficult situations, you have a high frequency loss. And I think it's time to try some hearing aids. I've never had anybody do this. Oh my God, I get to wear hearing aids? You mean just like my father? Nobody does that. People don't want to wear hearing aids. And I think this was really super clear going back like 7 years ago, 2017, 2018 maybe. The American Academy of Otolaryngology Head and Neck Surgery paper by Mike Valente and Amin Amlani. And they said, of course, the USA is the most expensive place in the history of the world to buy hearing aids. We all know that. But then they said this, of the data set they had, they said about a third of the people who wanted or would benefit from hearing aids wore them. So 1/3, 33%. But then they looked at the EU, the UK, Scandinavia, New Zealand, Canada, Australia, places where hearing aids are free, right? They cost nothing because you're a citizen, you get that health care. And what they said is in those situations where hearing aids are free, only 42% of the citizenry took hearing aids, meaning, roughly 60% of people with hearing loss, when hearing aids are free, said, I'm good. No, thanks. I'm not, and that's kind of important to realize, right? That even when hearing aids are free, almost 2 out of 3 people who could acquire them say, nah, I'm not going to do it. So I think that was a lesson there on stigma. And I'll share with you some studies showing that the stigma associated with hearing aid is the main reason people don't seek hearing aids. And so, having a different form factor, something that goes completely in your ear that's not visible, that might be acceptable for many people. Having a pair of glasses like what I'm wearing now, these are Nuance audio glasses, 3 microphones here, 3 here, 2 ports over here. It's air conduction, not bone conduction. And the sound is shot right down into my concha. That's far more acceptable. I mean, I wore, as you probably know, I wore hearing aids for about 12 or 15 years, depending on which hearing aids and when you saw me. I didn't like wearing them. I have a set of IICs that were, right now they're just about a year old, and I won't tell you who made them, but one of the premium manufacturers made them for me as a demo so I could hear what they were doing. And now I don't wear those because this sounds better. So things have changed dramatically. When I wear these out at a restaurant, at dinner, a cocktail party, Alan Senny's backyard, when he's barbecuing, when I wear these in social situations, I'm not self-conscious about it. And you could say, well, you shouldn't worry about cosmetics, but here's the truth of the matter. 15 million people wear Invisalign just in the USA. Why? Because it looks okay, because you don't have the railroad track stuff. When I was a kid, we called it railroad tracks. I don't mean to offend anybody, but very, very few people now will get, visible braces. 40 to 45 million people wear contact lenses. Why? Because they don't want to be seen in glasses. I can't even tell you how many people get Botox every 3, 4, or 5 months. See, you can tell I don't, but lots of people do, and it's great. And to me, this is very important that cosmetically, you want to be the best you can be. You want to project yourself to other people in a way that is satisfying and pleasing to you too. You don't want to be, going through life, looking not your best. And so this is very, very important. And it's not just in America, it's all over the world. People will, wash their hair often because they don't want it to look really greasy. People will wash their faces. People will get wig and toupees and hair transplants and hair implants and all of that stuff. And I don't think there's anything wrong with it. I think it's great. And if I had any hair, maybe I would take care of it differently. But you know, so you get my point. My point is, um, it's so important to look your best as much as you can because it makes you feel better about yourself and how you're presenting yourself to the world. Oh, is he saying hearing aids look terrible? I'm saying nobody wants it. And after 42 years as an audiologist, we've been pushing that boulder up the hill since I started in 1977 or 78 when I entered my master's program with Dr. Jack Katz. And, people just don't really want to wear hearing aids. And I get it. And I think it's important for all of us to get it. Now, that said, there are times when you have to, right? If your hearing loss is more than moderate or moderately severe, you don't have many choices because the over the counter products just aren't going to reach you. But again, the vast majority of people with hearing loss and listening disorders have a mild to moderate loss. They don't have it. In fact, I wrote a paper, gosh, it must have been 8 or 10 years ago, where only 5% of the population, maybe 3, 4, or 5% of the population have a profound loss, and severe losses was about 12%. So 85% of people, um, mild to moderate loss. Anyway, so you get the idea. The key to effective prosthesis, not only in the adequate adjustment of the hearing aid, meaning it fits their needs, but patient's positive attitude. And people don't have a positive attitude when they're embarrassed by the way it looks. Anyway, that's what I got out of that study. Hearing aids prevent retrograde degeneration. Now, I saved this for last because I think this is a new concept for most of us. And again, this paper just came out in May of 2025. Hearing aids prevent retrograde degeneration processes within the nervous system and stimulate neuroplasticity. So I wrote a paper earlier this spring on a brand new theory. It's Glick, Beck, Darrow, and Trin on cognitive maladaptation. I don't have enough time really to go into that, but I'll give you the brief on that. So I was sitting at a bar with Keith Darrow, true story, and I said, "Hey Keith, I have this idea. I want to talk to you about this." Because he's a neuroscientist and an audiologist from MIT, Harvard, and I said, "Here's my idea. You're born a blank slate, and you have neuroplasticity from the moment you're born until the moment you die. If supposing at age 40 you start to have auditory neuropathy and cochlear synaptopathy, and your hearing loss progresses and progresses until you're 65, 70. So now you've had that for a decade or two. And it could be true of visual loss, just the same as hearing loss. So you've got this hearing loss that's not diagnosed. And by the way, your doctor said, "Oh, get used to it. It's normal. Everybody has hearing loss," which, by the way, is totally nonsense. There's no such thing as normal hearing loss. There's no such thing as normal diabetes. There's no such thing as normal migraines. There's no such thing as normal lower back pain. These are all problems that need to be diagnosed and treated. But everybody laughs off hearing loss, right? Except the person who has it. And so I was saying to Keith, listen, so you go 20 years, 10 years, something like that. And now, because you have a neuroplastic central nervous system in the brain, what's going to happen? That brain starts to develop a different foundation because the information coming in is attenuated or distorted or missing entirely. And so your brain, because it's plastic, tends to develop a new baseline of meaning and sound and so you go many, many years with that, and that's very, very likely to cause confusion and all sorts of memory problems because what you remember sound as being like is not what you're hearing any longer. And then I started to really research that, and I found there's a lot of evidence of this. So it's a hypothesis. I'm not going to say it's true, but Keith, he went into this full steam ahead, and he liked it a lot. So he and I wrote the original paper on it. And then just before we sent it out for publication, we spoke with our pal, Dr. Young Trin, and Dr. Trin has the largest Alzheimer's clinic in Southern California. And he liked it, and he gave us a couple ideas. And then we said, yeah, but we're missing something. So you know what we did? I called Hannah Glick and I said, Hannah, you're a genius. We need your help. And she kind of rewrote the whole paper. So we made her first author. Um, so that's how it became Glick, Beck, Darrow, and Trin. But it's cognitive maladaptation. And it goes very much in accordance with this idea that hearing aids prevent retrograde degeneration, because if you're stimulating the auditory nervous system, you're not allowing all that bad stuff to happen. The bad stuff includes, of course, cognitive decline in some patients. We'll talk about that tomorrow. Uh, Cognitive decline is really just an issue in people who are at risk. I will argue tomorrow that hearing loss does not cause cognitive decline. Hearing loss in at-risk people tends to exacerbate cognitive decline. It's a very clear distinction between those two, and I'll go into that tomorrow. So this idea is that as your primary sensory inputs, your vision and your audition, get worse and worse and worse, and they're not corrected, they're not diagnosed, they're not treated, your brain recalibrates to that erroneous incoming signal. And that's the idea of cognitive maladaptation. And we had that peer reviewed at the Journal of Otolaryngology ENT Research. I think we published it in May of 2025. If you go to my website, douglaslbeck.com, don't forget the L. If you leave out the middle L, you're not going to find it. Go to douglaslbeck.com and go to publications in the upper right, scroll all the way down to 2025, you'll find it. Or you could just put in cognitive maladaptation, Glick, Beck, Darrow, and it's public access. You should be able to find it. Okay, so demographics in 2025. So we've already covered this, but I want to give this to you so that you can write it down or take a picture of it. Global burden of disease study: 73 million people in the USA had hearing loss in 2019, which is 22% of the population. 90% of them likely have mild to moderate hearing loss. Dr. Jeff Danhauer and I wrote in 2019 that there were 26 million people with subclinical. Now, some people, I've seen this online. I don't know what subclinical is. What is that? Really? Really? You don't know? Okay. Well, if you don't know, here it is. And then, subclinical means it doesn't show up on your normal tests. It's subclinical. So, there are a lot of things that can be subclinical, right? You can have all sorts of problems going on that don't show up in the test. That doesn't mean that it's not going on. That means the normal tests don't find it. So when we talk about subclinical hearing loss, these are things that you would have to actually do a speech and noise test to find. You would actually have to do a listening and communication assessment to find the problems. Patients having problems in all these areas, but their hearing is normal, right? Normal thresholds. That's subclinical, and that could be auditory processing disorders. That could be supra, S-U-P-R-A, suprathreshold hearing disorders. That could be auditory processing disorders, central hearing loss. So I call it subclinical because that's what the medical world tends to call these sorts of things. Anyway, among Americans with mild to moderate hearing loss, 95% are adults aged 18 and above. Larry Humes, Larry and me, and I think it was Brent Edwards, I think it was Harvey Abrams, and two or three other people, Gurjit Singh, in 2015, 10 years ago, we did a thing at the AAA in San Antonio, which is where I used to live, and it was a class on cognition and audition, and we had 200 seats, and there was 400 people there, standing room only. So that's how I met Larry. Well, I met Larry before that, but that's when he and I really started to engage. And so Larry in 2023 publishes The Unmet Need for Hearing Healthcare. Unmet need is the percentage of people with hearing loss or difficulty hearing who are not hearing aid users or have never tried hearing aids. And he said this: 85 to 90% of those with mild to moderate hearing loss fall into that category, resulting in about 58 to 60 million people, USA, who have an unmet need, and they have hearing loss, they have listening problems, and they're not going to seek your help or my help. They're not going to do anything about it. And why? Because it's the way it looks. They don't want to wear it. That's my opinion. You could you could hold fast into the access and affordability stuff. That's fine. I have no issue with that. I just happen to think that that's not it. And again, I can show you stuff like Valente and Amlani that also indicate that wasn't it. So here's this is a paper I wrote with my friend Dr. Hurrell, Temi Hurrell, and we published this in February of 2025. Now, again, this is, and I'm not going to go salesy on you, but this is a peer-reviewed paper, and we start this paper by saying what I said earlier. We recommend a comprehensive hearing health assessment by a licensed hearing care provider for individuals concerned about their own or a loved one's hearing health. Hearing health is crucial for hearing, listening, communication, hearing noise, tinnitus management, balance, cognitive function, mental health, personal and social relationships, social engagement, independence, financial stability, quality of life, and more. So we always say this, this is in your best interest, but 85 to 90% of the people are not going to do it. So then we have a choice. Do we try to help them and offer them a product that would be useful? Or do we just say, screw off. If you're not going to come and see me, then there's no help for you. And so I think it's important that I tell you that even though I work for, EssilorLuxottica, the manufacturer of Ray-Ban, Meta, Oakley, Meta, and Nuance, that as a doctor of audiology, I always recommend a comprehensive exam. And I think it should be every child, every senior, every adult. And because the vast majority have never had it done, so they're going to come in and say, "Well, my doctor ordered a hearing screening." Whenever your doctor orders a hearing screening, that's because he or she is suspecting something, which is brilliant on their part. But a hearing screening will rarely, if ever, show it. And if a hearing screening shows it, then what are you going to do? You're going to tell them to come back, and only 1 out of 5 will. So it's kind of a dead end street. I'm not a fan. However, for those who have perceived, or what I refer to as self-perceived mild to moderate hearing loss, who seek an OTC hearing aid that provides benefit for speech and noise and is physically comfortable and cosmetically pleasing. And that's where it gets commercial, right? Nuance represents a good alternative for them. Now, why don't people seek hearing health care? And we've sort of covered this already, but I'm going to give you the 6 reasons. Number 1, denial, right? I hear what I want to hear. Um, when I was a lad, people used to have to enunciate clearly, and now they don't have to do that, and everybody else is wrong. But my hearing is fine, right? That's denial. I hear what I want to hear, or husband, wife, spouse, friend, somebody says he has selective hearing, which means, clinically he has hearing loss. Um, so people are in denial. The thing about glasses and vision, right, is you get to a point when you're between 40 and 45 or so, maybe some people can go up to 48, 50, where your arms aren't long enough, right? You can't focus because your eye actually changes shape over time. And the fovea, where the light is supposed to be focused, is not the same as you age. And so you wear glasses to change that focal point, more or less, right? So you get to the point where you're in your 40s where you can no longer read your phone or read anything, right, without help. So you go to an optometrist, you get a diagnosis, you get glasses or contacts, whatever you do, and you're on your way. But people don't have that with hearing. People have no way to know that they have hearing loss because they they don't understand the difference between hearing and listening. Hearing is perceiving sound, and everybody with hearing loss, 85, 90% of them can hear, right? So how can I have hearing loss if I can hear you? Right. Because you have a high frequency loss. So you're not hearing the consonants. 90% of the intelligibility of English comes from the high frequencies. And that's what you're not hearing, which is why people sound like they're mumbling. I mean, you know that speech. You do that speech every day too. And but that's it, right? They have no way to know that they have hearing loss because they confuse that with hearing. And of course they can hear. And particularly people with listening disorders, speech and noise problems, the inability to hear clearly in an acoustically challenging situation. Comfort. So I will tell you, as somebody who wore hearing aids for 12, 13, 14, 15 years, depending on how we count that, it's not comfortable, right? I would have the hearing aid over my pinna, and then I would put on my glasses. And it's horrible. And those of you who are wearing it, maybe you've got better fitting glasses or better fitting Rick or right, but it's not comfortable. And at the end of the day, it's like taking your shoes off. You can't wait to take them off. So, comfort's an issue. And, some people will say, right, I get this on Nuance, right? Oh, you don't want your glasses and your hearing aid in one because what if one breaks? Well, you still have your other glasses and you could still have, another over the anyway. I think it's really nice having it all in one package. It's far more comfortable and much more attractive. What if it breaks? Well, the good thing about like Nuance, if it breaks, you go back to wherever you got it. You say, hey, while it's out being repaired, because it has 1 year parts of labor warranty, can I borrow a pair? And I can't imagine anybody saying no. Maybe somebody will, but they're a jerk and they should just take care of their patients, right? Anyway, accessibility and affordability, we already covered that. It's a funny thing because it goes back to like 2014. And my dear friend Carl Strom published an article, and Carl and I are very, very tight. I love Carl. I would never say anything disparaging. But he published an article showing that the price of premium hearing aids in 2014 was $4,700. And that's what got the senators and the Congress people, oh my God, people don't have $4,700 to spend on hearing aids. Yeah, but he also said in the article that only 15% of hearing aids were premium. The rest were not 4,700, right? But they didn't hear that and they didn't read that. They just started saying, oh, it's so expensive. We have to do something. And that, it's kind of the truth about how OTC came to be. And then, I was in a lot of those FDA and FTC hearings, and I don't think any of us were really opposed to it, but here's something that was interesting. Yeah, I mean, we were opposed to it when they had, cochlea bumping sound coming out, really loud, thunderous sound. So they lowered it by 5 dB, which is substantial. Anyway, um, it was so interesting to be in those meetings because I can tell you for sure that many of us thought OTC would come out $3.99, $4.99, $2.99, somewhere in that range, right? And I was just looking today on Walmart's website. You can buy OTCs for $29. They're probably garbage. You're absolutely not going to wear them. But premium OTCs, right now, premium OTCs, according to Consumer Reports, January 2025, between 1,800 and 2,800 bucks a pair for the good stuff. And if you look at the good stuff, you'll see that is about what it costs, which is kind of shocking, right? Because this all came out because of $4,700 for 15% of the market. And now we're almost at that price point with some of the OTC products. And the only thing that's been cut out is your knowledge, my knowledge, and our ability to diagnose and treat, right? So you can get products by themselves. Anyway, but I think the number one issue, excuse me, is really stigma. Um, I've never met a patient who wants to wear hearing aids. And I say that after 42 years. There are people who need to wear hearing aids. There are people who have no options in OTC or in invisible hearing aids. Absolutely, there are people who are beyond what we can do with those kind of products. But that'll change too over time. As OTC and as form factors change, people will have more options that they can pick and choose from. And maybe that's a really good thing because the vast majority of people with hearing and listening problems are not going to seek our help, as they do not now. All right. So this paper came out in August, so about a month ago, 2 months ago now, and they said stigma is one key deterrent to hearing aid uptake, with many individuals expressing stigma as well as self-perceived feelings of shame. I never felt shame about having hearing loss, but stigma, absolutely. And this is Frisbee, Manachaya, Daywood, Demon, and Devet Swanepoel. And these guys are, brilliant group. I mean, just really super smart people. And I know most of them personally. Individuals are concerned that hearing aids will be viewed as a sign of old age and reduced cognitive or social competency. It's not just will be viewed is my opinion. And I'll show that to you as we move along. This stigma is called the hearing aid effect. It's also called hearing aid stigma. Those two things mean the same. Despite incredible advances in technology and increasing awareness about the importance of hearing health, the stigma around hearing aids and hearing loss, is a big deal. The stigma surrounding hearing loss and the use of hearing aids persists. Stigma related to hearing loss and hearing aids in low and middle income settings presents a significant barrier to help seeking and device adoption. And this is exactly what I've been saying since we started this conversation 43 minutes ago. As you all know, October 2022 is when the FDA approved over-the-counter hearing aids. So that's fine. I have no issue with that. If you're not familiar with the FDA rules and regs on that, you might want to focus in on this QR code. I'll leave it for a few seconds. People who are candidates for OTC hearing aids from the FDA website have trouble hearing speech in noise, find it hard to follow speech in groups. They have trouble hearing on the phone. Listening makes them tired, and they need to turn up the loudness. Okay, so I'm going to give you 3 more seconds, 2 more seconds, 1 more second. Now the QR code is gone. So access and affordability, I would say in many respects that's been solved through OTC, because people don't need to access you or me if they're going to go the OTC route. And affordability, again, $29 at Walmart, but that's for really crummy hearing aids. And I can't imagine that they would be of any use whatsoever. So access, I think, is solved because you just go to your phone and put in hearing aids in your zip code and you'll find a bazillion places. But affordability, still questionable because, as I said earlier, Consumer Reports would tell you that hearing aids that are good quality OTC are very expensive. You still have to spend a couple of $1,000s. Um, this is Sieber, and she was talking about Best Buy OTC products. They range from 200 to 25.50 a pair. Now, this is Best Buy, right? Better and premium OTC products often cost 1,800 to 29.50 per pair, beyond the reach of most people. You're probably familiar with the Susie Armand quote. I guess this is 2023. And Susie Armand is a financial guru. She's a genius. And she said most Americans don't have $500 for an emergency. If they had a medical emergency or some other emergency, they probably have to put it on charge card. They don't have the cash. So if you don't have the cash, right, can you imagine um, spending 1,800 to 29.50 on a pair of hearing aids? Oh, there you go. Yeah, sorry. I didn't realize that was right there. It seems hard to imagine that most Americans could spend more than 500 on a pair of low to mid-range OTC hearing aids. That's my opinion. If people don't have $500 available to them, do you think they're going to spend two or three or four times that on a set of hearing aids? Probably not. This is the Consumer Reports one from January 2025. OTC is available at all price ranges, but the adults surveyed were willing to pay $200. So that's the Walmart customer and maybe some other online something or other. Many respondents were not confident about choosing the right device on their own. Turns out that's a big issue. I'll show you a peer-reviewed report on that before we finish. This is best over-the-counter hearing aids. This is from Consumer Reports, January 2025. They looked at Audion, Eargo, Lexi, Lucid, Sony, and what they said. Wait, I just want to make sure I did that correctly so I don't. No, this is a different report entirely. Okay, so they looked at the best over-the-counter hearing aids, and that's where the pricing came from 1,800 to 2,500, 2,800 a pair. That was from this article. Sorry, I should have put that in first. August 2025. This is, let me get rid of this thing. Okay. Usability of over-the-counter hearing aids in older adults. So this is 82 adults, 54 of whom are new users. Okay. So 28 are experienced hearing aid users. This is so interesting to me that education, the educational level of the patient, remained a strong predictor of OTC hearing aid skills. People with less than a college degree had about a half lower performance compared to those with a master's degree or higher. In other words, people who obtained a lower educational threshold were less able to use OTC products by themselves. 68%, so 56 of them, were unsuccessful in completing the over-the-counter hearing aid assessment. The most challenging tasks for people who had a lower education level, manually adjusting the volume and pairing the hearing aids with a smartphone and replacing the wax guard. So that's pretty interesting, right? So if you're going to have somebody, seeking OTC without your or my input or any professional, there's a good chance they're going to have trouble with it, right? Adjusting the volume is tough. It's going to depend. Is it on the hearing aid that you adjusted? Is it in an app? How, right? Pairing the hearing aids with a smartphone. Well, that is a problem because there's a bazillion different, smartphones, lots of different hearing aids, and they follow a similar pattern, right? You identify it, you pair it, all that stuff. But if you're not used to doing this, I can see it being a problem. And replacing the wax guard, well, yeah. So those are the major impediments for people with lesser education. And I'm really glad they wrote this. I mean, this is the American Journal of Audiology. This is brand new, just came out 2 months ago, and this is a national publication. New hearing aid users performed significantly worse than experienced hearing aid users on the task of putting the hearing aids on. So I hear this in a lot of lectures I do. People say, "Oh, over the counter, 50% return rate." Yeah, it might be for many of them. For some of them, it's not my company, but if you have 50% return rate, it's got to kill you. As far as return on investment and revenue and everything about your P&L statement, shipping, not the least of which, right? But this is a big deal. And when you have so many people failing, it doesn't bode well. People will talk to other people and say, "Oh, I tried that; it didn't work for me," and that's the last thing they're going to do about it. So education emerged as a strong predictor of success. All right. So this is an article I wrote about a year ago with my dear friend Dr. Harvey. And hold on one second. Sorry, when I talk for an hour, I need to take a drink of water, which I'll do in a minute. So Dr. Harvey and I, he's a clinical psychologist. We wrote this article. It's a hearing review on stigma as cosmetics. And it wasn't just my opinion, but the opinion of a well-respected psychologist. Many, probably most people don't want to share or show or talk about their age-related deficits, problems, or disability. Hey, let me tell you about my arthritis. Let me tell you about going bald. Let me tell you about having to wear. Nobody does that, right? If you're, in a loving relationship, you may tell your loved one, about your maladies and your problems, but in general, you don't want to be out there indicating to everybody what your problems are. And that's the thing about hearing aids, right? Is we know from the peer-reviewed literature in the 60s, 70s, 80s, when you wear traditional hearing aids, you're thought to be 10 years older than you are without hearing aids. And then that you really are. You're thought to have about 10 points lower IQ, and you're thought to be incompetent. Excuse me one second. This is the most expensive plain water I have ever bought. This is from Sprouts Farmers Market. I would not have purchased it there, but that's where I was. So in this article, Dr. Harvey and I talk about 18 to 20 million people have their teeth straightened using Invisalign because it allows correction and more or less it's invisible. 45 million people in the US wear contact lenses. LASIK eye surgery, holy moly, 800,000 people annually. Some of you may remember about 10 years ago, I had my LASIK done. And, for 6 months, oh my gosh, I didn't need to wear glasses. By 12 months, I was wearing glasses again. Probably by now it's improved, but it wasn't so good then. And people do all of these things, right? I have no problem with any of it. I think it's great. But I think this explains why people are looking for a more acceptable form factor because people generally don't want to lose their hair. They wear cosmetic implants on different parts of their bodies. They wear makeup. They get Botox. They get facials, chemical peels, other skin treatments, all of which is fine. I'm not criticizing any of those. I'm saying it's important for us, to look our best and to put our image of ourselves forward to other people. These are essentially personal decisions made to make the individual feel better about the way they perceive their own physical appearance, and I think it's fine. Adults making personal decisions, I have no issue with that. Hearing aid stigma. There is ample evidence of stigma associated with old age and hearing aids in our culture. Dr. Amlani reports even if hearing aids were given away for free, 2/3 of the hearing impaired population would not acquire hearing aids. Walhagen reports pervasive perceived stigma associated with hearing loss and hearing aids and the close association with ageism and perceptions of disability. She notes young adults report negative impact of hearing loss and hearing aids on their relationship with their peers, self-concept, and willingness to self-disclose. People, particularly teenagers, right? They don't want to wear hearing aids. Peer pressure is a killer. And, they'll do everything they can to fit in and to look like everybody else. Hearing aid stigma. This is Nick Bach and colleagues. All participants in their study believed hearing loss and hearing aids were associated with stigma. They report an association between hearing loss and hearing aids and stereotypes associated with aging, disability, and difference. And particularly in younger people, you don't want to be different. You want to be part of the crowd. Now, I had the good fortune about 2 weeks ago, I was in Ireland, actually last weekend. And I spoke at the Irish Hearing Aid Association meeting, and it was a joy. Lovely people, lovely, lovely, lovely. And but the British Irish Hearing Instrument Manufacturers Association, BEMA, put this out June 10th, 2025. Now, the first thing they did, of course, they said, what are people's biggest priorities when choosing a hearing aid? Oh, personalization, affordability, design. And look at this. See, design only 6%. But you got to wonder, well, what does that mean? 15% tech, 31% how discreet it is. Wait, is that in addition to design? Sustainability. Wow, 1% cares about sustainability. 3% tech compatibility. So, you'd say, okay, well, that's interesting. But here's the thing. Is there a stigma around getting hearing tested and wearing hearing instruments? Yes, it's still significant at 33%. Yes, but declining at 62%. So you take this 62 and this 33 and you put them together, you get about 95% of the 200 audiologists surveyed said stigma is a big issue. So my point is, listen, stigma shouldn't be. You shouldn't judge people on the way they look. It just happens to be pretty much true that we do that. It's depressing to think that people won't do something good for themselves because of stigma, particularly hearing aid stigma and cosmetics and things like that. But I do think it's reality, and I think we have to address that with our patients, and we have to say, this is a hearing aid that'll fit you so well audiologically. This will maximize your ability to understand in difficult, challenging situations. And you can hook up all sorts of Bluetooth devices, and you can have, wonderful phone calls in both ears at the same time, and you can Bluetooth to it, and you can stream to it, and but it looks like this. And then you show them something that's cosmetically more pleasing. Unless they really have to go with the custom with the prescription product, I think most of them will choose the thing that's more cosmetically pleasing, and usually that's a lot less money too. And so these are important issues, and it's unfortunate because the major hearing aid manufacturers, whom I love, they could have made alternative form factors for a while now, and here we are. People with hearing loss avoid hearing aids for many reasons, and social stigma plays a significant role, according to Forbes 2024. Social stigma. 48%, so let's call it half of the respondents believe there's a stigma associated with hearing aids. 63% of millennials think that. 47% of Gen Xers and 41% of boomers agree there's a stigma. Those millennials, man, they do it every time. WebMD. So I was really honored to do a podcast with WebMD 6 months ago, and so I looked up their data on hearing aid stigma, and they said this: 62% of Americans wear visible corrective eyewear, but 45 million wear contacts. Only 15% of people with hearing loss wear hearing aids, meaning 85% do not. They report resistance to hearing aids is deeply rooted in stigma, especially with old age. Do you notice how none of the people who are reporting on stigma talk about access and affordability? I never believed access and affordability were the primary impediments. I think there are certainly factors. Absolutely, they matter. But the big thing has always been, I think, the way it looks. Okay, peer-reviewed over-the-counter hearing aid outcomes. This one, I showed you this one earlier. More affordable hearing aids are now available due to over-the-counter. This study, I didn't show this one to you earlier. I'm sorry. I showed you a different one by two of the same authors. More affordable hearing aids are now available due to over-the-counter hearing aids. This study compared hearing aid outcomes reported by clients from OTC and conventional hearing care professional service delivery models. The online survey was done via Hearing Tracker users and Lexi OTC hearing aid user databases. So they had 665 hearing aid users, 406 through conventional hearing care professionals, 250 through OTC. Self-reported hearing aid benefit and satisfaction were measured with the International Outcomes Inventory. No significant differences for overall hearing aid outcomes between hearing care professionals and OTC users was evident using a regression analysis, controlling for age, gender, duration of hearing loss, duration before hearing aid purchase, self-reported hearing difficulty, and unilateral versus bilateral. They concluded over-the-counter hearing aid outcomes could complement and provides similar satisfaction and benefit to HCP models for adults. Service delivery aspects such as self-fitting, acclimatization programs, remote support, behavioral incentivization, and payment options should be investigated for the role. Now, here's the thing. In their um, so I'm going to do this off the top of my head because I thought I had a different slide behind it. The problem here is that, and I may admittedly have this wrong, but they had the same hearing aid. It was an OTC. I won't tell you what brand, but it was very good quality OTC. And some of the patients did it themselves, and some of them had it done through a hearing care professional. And so what they said is you got the same result. So that's interesting, right? Because we know that their education matters, and maybe these were smarter people with better education. Who knows? But the thing that struck me is the rate limiting factor was not really whether they got it through an HCP, a hearing care professional, or self-fitted. It was the product. So I wrote a letter. I wrote an article about this where I pointed out that, supposing you had 25 NASCAR racers, all in their 20s and 30s. These guys are incredible drivers, right? And supposing you had 25 retired librarians, and you put them all in a 1967 Volkswagen that was set, it could not go more than 25 miles an hour. So you took these NASCAR race car drivers and you took the librarians and you put them in 25 miles an hour going around the track, and you say, see, there's no difference between race car drivers and librarians. That's the wrong conclusion. The fact of the matter is that none of them could go 26 miles an hour because the car could only go 25. So in other words, it wasn't the skill of either population, the librarian or the NASCAR drivers. It was that you gave them a device, a car in this situation, they couldn't perform better in the hands of a more talented driver, and wouldn't perform worse in the hands of a lesser talented driver. So you found out that the two driver populations did the same. I think that's a good analogy for what happened here, is that and based on this, of course, we had a lot of stuff in the JAMA, the Journal of the American Medical Association, saying no difference between audiologist fit and self-fit. Well, no, not if they all have the exact same device and it was meant to be self-fit. It wasn't a very complicated device to begin with. So just my critique of that paper. I love these guys. I know these authors, but I don't think that I don't think that's the conclusion I would have come to. This is the Nuance product, which again, I don't want to do a sales thing, and I apologize if it comes across that way, but it is peer reviewed. So we can give it a little bit of credence. And what we found is that hearing aid A and hearing aid B, these are two of the world's leading premier prescription hearing aids. You look at their SNR 50, the signal to noise ratio, to get 50% of the words correct. And if you're not familiar with SNR 50, you can go to Google and put in Beck and Benitez, put in 2-minute speech and noise test. It was published by AAA in 2019. And it tells you what an SNR 50 is. And Mead Killian has certainly explained it for 25 years now. So it's the signal to noise ratio to get half the words correct. So what we're seeing here is hearing aid A got an improvement in signal to noise ratio wearing hearing aid A of about 2.2 or something like that, 2.1. Hearing aid B, another major manufacturer, their improvement in SNR 50 went up to about 2.0, 2.1. And one patient got up to about 4.2, but the average was about 3. It doesn't show on this graph. The average wearing this other product, this OTC product, was 3.4, I think it was, maybe 3.3. But that just shows, yeah, the speech and noise evaluation that's peer reviewed showed they did really well. The real world scenario study, so there's 4 presets in this particular device. Yeah, it was 3.49. There it is. I'm sorry. That was the average. The thing to know about this particular device is it's got 4 presets. Those 4 presets came about as a result of Dr. Urbanski's work, where she said, if you're going to fit people with NAL and L2, people with mild to moderate loss, and you want to reach about 80 or 85% of that population, you need these 4 presets. And that's what wound up in Nuance. And so they're, they are for the NAL, NL2 targets, and you can see here the differences in the presets and who's appropriate for them and who's not. So I won't go into that because I don't want to do the salesy thing, but I do want to show you our peer-reviewed results. This is D'Souza and colleagues in 2024. This, you know what? I apologize. This is the paper that I was just talking about where they had self-fit versus audiologist fit. This comparative effectiveness research study demonstrated self-fit OTC can offer comparable, right? This is the one that I wrote the letter about where I thought that's not the conclusion I would come up with. So I'm sorry, I apologize. I should have put these in a different order. Sitkowski and Souza. Now, do all OTCs do really well? No, they don't. Do OTC hearing aids effectively improve aspects of everyday communication, particularly with pre-programmed OTCs, right? The goal of their study was to evaluate conversation efficiency, or the time taken during conversation with a familiar communication partner, and auditory recall following speech recognition, a critical aspect of participation during conversations, right? Did you understand what was just said? And they found 30 adults with mild to moderate hearing loss and their communication partners fitted with pre-programmed OTC hearing aids using whatever the default program was to best match the target for each listener. They didn't find a significant improvement in conversation with OTC hearing aid compared with unaided. So, you know, I don't want to say that they're all the same or they're all brilliant or they're all terrible. And if you go into the peer-reviewed literature, you can find evidence. This one was in Ear and Hearing in December of 2024, so almost a year ago. And this one didn't come out so good for OTC. And I think it's appropriate to mention that. This is the article I wrote, right? The author believes that optimum choice for patients with hearing loss is not the patient pursuing his or her own do-it-yourself diagnosis and self-self-result, but rather pursue the audiologist-driven, patient-centered approach using the idea of diagnosis first, treatment second. So I can, and I couldn't imagine that different outcomes would occur under these two different device approaches. In other words, because the race car drivers that I mentioned earlier and the librarians had the same kind of broken down Volkswagen to drive, I wouldn't expect the race car drivers to do any better than librarians. They're both using, you know, not a car that they chose and not one that would allow them to show off their skills. So I would assume they would do the same. This is my pal, Brian Taylor. Most of you know Brian, I'm sure. The Promise and Peril of OTC Hearing Aids in July and August 2025, so 2 months ago. You know, it's interesting, right? None of us have really good numbers on how many OTCs are sold. We think, my guess right now is about 7 or 8 million pairs of prescription hearing aids are sold every year in the USA, including big box and VA and everything else. And about maybe 15% of those 750 to 1.6 million are OTC. But we don't have a way to know because they come in through Amazon, through Prime, through UPS, through whomever, and so they're not counted. But Dr. Taylor did say that satisfaction is quite high. In fact, just a few points lower than prescription hearing aids. OTC is attracting younger people. It turns out it's a couple of years younger, but it's not like, you know, traditionally it's 67, 68-year-olds getting prescription, and now we're getting 45-year-olds. No, it's not like that. It's more like 67-year-olds and 65-year-olds. Anyway, so OTC is attracting younger people, working age, who would not otherwise seek the services of an audiologist, which again is 80 or 85%. I want to recommend that you go to Hearing Advisor to look at how the hearing aids that you like best stack up to others. This is Steve Taddy's work, and it's very, very clever. In June, I looked up the Hearing Advisor ratings, and what you see here is he has about 87 or 88 or 89 hearing aids that he's tested. Probably now he's over 90. But you could say speech and noise, quality of sound, you know, all that stuff, and you just click on this. This is not a live link. This is a photo of his website. And so you look at OTC and they do rate all the different products. So this OTC, for instance, Sony CRE-E10, released in 2023, price, you know, it's not terrible. It's an OTC and it's got a sound grade of A, which is Oticon Intent 2024, quite a bit more pricey than Sony. Prescription, also sound grade of A, right? So you see these things. Here's a nuance here. Middle, they retail for about $1,200 without lenses. They come with They come with clear lenses that when you walk outside, they get darker. When you're inside, they get lighter, right? The transition lenses. And look, we have an A rating too, and that was nice. Here's Starkey Evolve, A rating. Here come, I'm not familiar with that, Jabra and Hand Select, A rating. So these are good sound qualities when they're maximized, right? So it's important, I think, to look that up if you haven't. And you'll see he does rate OTC. Here's 3 or 4 of them on this particular sheet, and prescription. And sometimes you'll see that OTC does better than some prescription, and some prescription do better than some OTC. The hearing aid market in the USA is about a 1.9 billion in 2022, and you can see I don't really know why I put this in here, but I did. Churn Golo over-the-counter hearing aid enabled earbuds merging hearing health and tech. This is in the Journal of the American Medical Association 2025. OTC adoption remains low. Again, probably 15%. But you know why I think? No, you don't know why I think, but I'm going to tell you. I think if you agree with me that the main impediment to acquiring hearing aids has been the way they look, the form factor itself, what did most OTCs do when they came out, right? They looked like traditional hearing aids. Not all, but most. And so I can't see people saying, oh, now I'm going to get that because it looks just like the other product that I didn't want to wear. And, yeah, it's a lot cheaper, but they didn't, I think people don't seek it because of the hearing aid stigma. But what do I know? However, recent innovations in wireless earbud capabilities offer promise. In 2024, Apple released a software update to their popular wireless earbuds. And, AirPods Pro 2 is a very, very good product. And now they have the new one, which has much better battery life and more gain and probably better for people with hearing impairment. But here's the thing. You're not going to wear AirPods while you're seeing patients. You're not going to wear AirPods if you're at a meeting in a professional situation. AirPods are great. I have 2 pairs left, and I'm going to buy the 3.0 because for situational use, it's great. Now think about this for situational use thing. You and I have been trained to think, oh, the battery doesn't last 24 hours. It's not going to go all day. Oh, okay, I get that. But you know how many AirPods have been sold? 550 million, 500 million. Are they wearing those all day? No. They're wearing them situationally when they want to stream, when they want to hear clearly in difficult situations, because it's got a reasonably good noise reduction system. But the bigger point to me is that AirPods can be used situationally successfully, and I think it shows that 550 million pairs sold means that people know that they will wear it when they need it. I wear my Nuance all day, but I only turn it on when I'm having a conversation with somebody. So I don't know if you just heard it go bum bum, battery 100%. So now it's on. And so now I'm hearing much more consonants and much more high frequency, but I wouldn't do it in talking to a laptop because I don't need it for that. If I'm driving in my car, I have Bluetooth and I have a really good stereo in my car. So I'm not going to turn on my hearing aids. When I'm just sitting here typing, doing research, I'm not going to turn it on. When somebody comes to the door, I'm going to turn it on. When I'm at a restaurant, I'm going to turn it on. At a cocktail party, I turn it on, and I get 8 or 9 hours. And if I were to wear it for the first 8 or 9 hours of my workday, I just lay it on the battery charger and charge it in an hour, and then I'll have another 8 or 9 hours. So the point is that situational use is more than acceptable to patients because 550 million people bought Apple AirPods. This represents and AirPod was the first time the FDA authorized software-based hearing aid functionality on an existing hardware device. So I'm glad we got to mention that. As of July 20th, 2025, here's the reference, because if you can't believe 500 million units were sold, AirPods estimate that through 2023, 550 million have been sold. Units have been sold. I said pairs. It's units. Still 500 million units. That's substantial. And that was 2 years ago. Have been sold since their launch in 2016. In 2023 alone, AirPods generated $18 billion. Now that's important because, 18 billion, man, that's almost twice the value of Alan Senney. I mean, Alan, he's very wealthy, but even Alan doesn't make that much money, compared to AirPods. People will use hearing aids situationally if they find it to be beneficial and it doesn't have a hearing aid stigma associated with it. So we talked a little bit about this one earlier. Negative stereotypes associated with hearing loss and hearing aid use are widespread. Hearing loss is often portrayed on television as a source of humor, embarrassment, or social isolation. This stigma can significantly impact whether individuals pursue a workup for hearing loss or their decision to wear hearing aids. A new standard has been set by combining hearing health with an everyday technology as a natural and necessary part of life and making hearing health more accessible, more normalized than ever before. This innovation is also a testament to the growing convergence of hearing health, consumer tech, music listening, where devices once limited to a single function, such as earbuds, now easily blend medical utility with everyday use. For those of you keeping score, Dave Fabry and I wrote an article about this 20 years ago, and we said the same thing. They didn't credit us, but that's okay. Such integration can transform how we address hearing loss on a broader scale. Indeed, recent data have linked age-related hearing loss to cognitive decline, dementia, and other neuropsych and comorbid conditions in older adults, underscore the urgent need to prioritize hearing health on a population level. And this is in, JAMA, Journal of the American Medical Association, 2025, just a few months ago. Frontiers of Audiology and Otology in 2024 pointed out that by treating more people at a younger age with less hearing loss than traditional prescription hearing aids, OTC hearing aids can potentially have a significant impact beyond hearing care, such as delaying or preventing cognitive decline. And I would say delaying or preventing all sorts of things like anxiety and depression and psychological well-being decrements because people don't feel comfortable in social situations because they can't understand what people are saying. Approximately 20% of the world's population have some degree of hearing loss. Now that's interesting, right? Because that's exactly what the global burden of disease said, right? 1 out of 5 people. 90% are mild to moderate. So I've showed you numbers saying 80, 85, or 90% are mild to moderate. So you've got that from a lot of different sources. When compared to new prescription hearing aid users, new OTC hearing aid users, on average, 2 years younger. That's the exact number I told you earlier. And they have milder hearing loss, but more meaningfully, they had a significantly shorter duration of hearing loss. So when you think about cognitive maladaptation, it had less of a chance to occur. A reputable pair of over-the-counter hearing aids cost between $800 and $3,000. Apple seems to have discovered this desirable price point for the AirPods, pricing them between $129 and $249. Because there's lots of models of AirPods. I think there's at least 7 or 8 right now. And the AirPod 3.0, if you're going to wear it situationally and you want something for $300 or $400, that looks pretty good to me. But again, you wouldn't wear it in a social situation. And if I were wearing AirPod 3.0s now, you'd be saying, what? It doesn't. So you get the idea. So that's what we've got. Let's see what else we got here. The study aimed to identify individual factors associated. I shared this study with you earlier. Education emerged as a strong predictor of over-the-counter hearing aid skills, underscoring the need to address disparities in device usability. And I think we're going, this is my last slide. We're going to open it for question and answer unless Alan says we're not allowed to, but then, Alan's kind of an easygoing guy. He's going to do it. This is really interesting. FDA specifies the maximum output level without limiting gain, right? The FDA set the maximum output level 111 dB SPL at any frequency for OTC devices with linear amplification, or 117 for those with compression. Defining the maximum output level in a 2cc coupler without limiting the gain allows amplification far more than what is needed for people with mild to moderate loss. The above analysis showed that while OTC hearing aids are intended for people with mild to moderate loss, as we've been talking about all night, the current FDA guidelines, in fact, allow sufficient amplification for people with severe or profound hearing loss. Now, that's not me saying that. That's Frontiers of Audiology and Otology, March 2024. So you might want to look that up. And this, these are 2 pretty smart authors, King Chung and Fengang Zheng. And I think they're onto something here. So OTC hearing aid manufacturers and users need to be aware of the possibility and the danger of over-amplification. This, to me, this is the only peer-reviewed paper I've ever seen on this topic, and I'd urge you to look it up and take a look and see what you think. So why are there so few hearing care professionals doing best practices, doing extended bandwidth, listening and communication assessments, speech and noise testing. So I asked this question to Mike Valente almost 10 years ago. And I said, I'd have to guess that it's fewer than 10% of us do best practices. And I said, does that sound about right from where you sit, Mike? Dr. Valente said, well, honestly, I don't know the exact number. I think you're in the ballpark, but it's probably closer to 20 or 30%, which is still unacceptable. And, so you may not believe that number, 20, 10, 30% of us do best practices, but think about RealAir. That's been a best practice for AAA and for Asher for decades, and for IHS for 8 or 10 years now. And this is in 2021, July, August, Audiology Today. According to 10-year-old data revisited at the 2021 AAA convention, about 30% of practicing and dispensing audiologists perform real ear measurements regularly. Not every patient, but regularly, always or nearly always. Anyway, so you get the idea. So I am a big fan of doing things properly, and I always encourage patients to get a comprehensive audiometric evaluation. But I realize 85% of them or so are not going to do that. So I think OTC is a good alternative for many of them in many situations. So I think that is all I have. Alan, if you want to jump in here, we can do Q&A. Other than that, I'm going to hit stop share. Let's see what that did. Oh, that brought me in bigger. That's weird. And there's 114 people. And I'm going to go to the Q&A here. My wife is actually a librarian, and she does drive like a race car driver. That's from Chuck Schultz. Chuck, if you'll let us know when she's going to be on the road, we're going to stay off the road. Anonymous attendee at 809 says, Dr. Beck, can you provide some details about the nuanced classes? Where's the mic? Where are the speakers? Okay, well, that's interesting. So I'm only going to do that because you asked me to do that. So these are actual nuance. They're on. I'm going to turn them off. You heard the feedback. It's the same as if you cover a hearing aid to go. Yeah, right. Same as if you cover them here, because there's 3 microphones here. I don't know if you can see it. Uno, dos, tres. Uno, dos, tres. The sound is coming out of ports on the bottom here. I don't know if you can see them. I'm sorry, it's really hard to show it to you. But there's a port right here, exactly where my pinky is. You can probably see it there a little bit. And the sound is coming out of that channel, being directed directly into my concha. And so somebody sitting next to me wouldn't hear it amplified. I did a thing with Ben Thompson at wherever the heck he and I were, California Academy of Audiology 2 or 3 weeks ago. And he asked that exact same question, but he put up a little video on that. So you go to LinkedIn, go to Ben Thompson, the tinnitus guy, and you can see how we handled it there. Those are the only 2 questions I see. Alan, if you're talking, your mic is off. I am happy to take any other questions. If you know what, I'm going to just be rogue and say, turn on your mic and ask me a question. I'm happy to take them.
Dr. Beck,
Yes.
actually, participants can actually turn on their mic, so they'll have to write in the Q&A.
Oh no, well that's a rate limiting factor right there. Okay, so if you have a question, write it into the Q&A. And Stephen, was that you? It sounded like you.
That was me.
Okay, and do you see any questions that I didn't answer? I mean, I'm happy to.
No, I see that you've answered all of them.
Okay.
I see one from Terry.
Okay, we've got
There's one
7
there at
minutes.
the bottom from Terry.
Terry Seekins, some of the reviews report own voice complaints. Do you notice any? No. Well, listen, own voice complaints is a major ordeal right up until you calibrate the darn thing. It has 2 calibrations. One is for own voice, and that takes 20 seconds. So what you do is you turn on the calibration setting, which is in your app, and you go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. You do that for 20 seconds. And people will do this. They'll go 1, 2. I don't want that. I want you to do full voice for 20 seconds. Say, count up to 50, and then do the alphabet, and then recite your best friend's name and phone number, whatever. But keep talking for a full 20 seconds. And then it also calibrates for the size and shape of your head. If you don't do that, your voice is going to sound horrible. And it's the same with a hearing aid. Imagine taking Siemens, Starkey, Wattix, Resound, Phonak, Oticon, Unitron off the shelf, stick it in your ear. Your voice is going to sound horrible. You have to program it for your own voice. And we've known this for decades now. So thank you for asking that. I'm glad we have the chance to talk about that because I've done 400 or 500 demos of Nuance, and when I do it, I give them a calibrated pair. They're calibrated to me, so it's not going to be perfect. But if they're not calibrated for anybody, you're going to get feedback. You're going to get own voice. Your voice is going to sound like you're in a barrel. Funny thing about that, so many patients tell you with their prescription hearing aids, my voice sounds like I'm in a barrel, and none of them have ever had their head in a barrel. How do they all come up with that? I don't know, but it's the same with Nuance. If you don't calibrate it, it's going to sound poopy. And poopy, by the way, yes, that is a scientific term. Okay, so thank you for asking that, Terry. I appreciate that.
Doug,
Anonymous.
you may have addressed this during your talk. It was probably during the deepest part of my nap. But what what is the price point of these?
They retail for 1,200 without lenses. Most people like me, because I'm old, I'm 70, I wear glasses all the time. And I'm not as old as Alan, by the way, but I'm old. And if you gave me a pair of Nuance with just the audio in it, right, just the hearing aid, that would kind of be stinky because then I could see or hear, but I want to do both. So I had my lenses put in. When I first tried them back last November, I thought it was a very, very clever idea and I liked it a lot, but I couldn't wear them while working because I am dependent on reading and my phone and my computer and all the stuff. So pretty quickly I had my lenses put in, which, a couple of $100 because I have bifocal lenses, but you can fit virtually um, any vision requirement because again, they're EssilorLuxottica, so they do know how to make lenses. They're the world's largest manufacturer of eyeglass lenses. And so you can get your lenses put in and you could bring it. What I would urge audiologists to do is to call your local, excuse me, your local optometrist and say, hey, do you fit these? Because I have a lot of people who are fitted, not tested. They did not buy hearing aids. I'd like to show them that this exists. And what I would recommend is they go to your office to get their lenses put in. And you could do that. You could work with LensCrafter. They work with us all the time. Pearl Vision works with us. Target Optical works with us. Four Eyes works with us. So they're, again, Essilor is the world's largest frame and lens manufacturer. So you can get your lenses put in. I say that knowing 99% of the time that's going to be true. Maybe 1% who needs super duper, super hot special lenses probably can't do it, but I think they could. So that's the thing, right? We want to work on it with an optometrist because then when they are selling a set of Nuances to their patients, because you can buy them already at all those optical stores, when a patient doesn't like it, it'd be nice for that optometrist or optician to say, hey, I want you to go see Dr. Seni. He's actually an audiologist. Let's get him to do a comprehensive audiometric eval. Let's see what you really need. And then he can fit you up with, an appropriate professionally dispensed hearing aid product. And I think it works both ways. I'm happy to refer to optometrists for the lens end of it. and I think they would be happy to work with their patients to refer them to you for the audiometric end of it. Alan, did you fall asleep again?
No. Shh. All right. Here's a question from Kathy. Does Nuance offer a Bicross model?
No, there's no Bicross. It's not available on Cross or Bicross. And they currently have 3 different lenses. This is called Square. They make a rounder one called Panthos, and they have reds and blacks and blues, and as time goes on in the very near distant future, in the next month or 2 or 3, you'll see more frames, more colors, more sizes. Even these Square ones are available in 3 sizes, which I call small, medium, large. Optometrists call them whatever they call them, 46 millimeters, 52, 50. I don't know. I don't speak optometry, but so they come in 3 frame sizes for different head sizes, and they all have to be calibrated. It takes, about 20 seconds to do voice, takes about 20 seconds to do frame fitting your head size. And then, you have a lot of NAL, NL2 presets for 85% of people with mild to moderate loss. Can you fit every single mild to moderate loss? No, you can't. There are going to be some real sensory neural precipitous ski slope losses, like patient has no hearing after 1000 to 1500 hertz. They're going to be better fit with a prescriptive device. But the thing is, in that situation, I'd probably let the patient try it, because if they get a much better SNR, they might say, yeah, this is great. For $1,200, I'm going to do this. So I think again, we're at the point where we're past the tipping point. We have products that are consumer electronics, consumer tech merged with medical tech, and we're seeing that across the board. You see people wearing the glucose monitor on their bicep for diabetes. We see people wearing all sorts of monitors for falls and blood pressure and heart rate. I think this is brilliant. The more accessible it is for patients, the more they're going to use it.
One more question here. Are they covered by any kind of vision insurance?
Yeah, this is a good point. Thank you for asking that. The story with hearing aid insurance, it's a mess, right? But people who get Nuance, who go to an optometrist to have their lenses created for them, quite often that whole end of it will be covered by their insurance, because they don't say what type of glasses it has to be, and they just say it has to be a custom lens. So most insurers will in fact cover the lens portion of it. So they would pay retail, because most over-the-counter hearing aids are not covered by insurance. But if they have custom lenses, that it becomes something that is most often insured. The reason I hedge on this, I would never promise anybody anything with insurance. I think insurance is a disaster, whether it's your car insurance, your home insurance, your health insurance. When you need it, it fails you the most. I wouldn't go without any of those three. I definitely want all those insurers. But you know how it is. You put in a claim for something that's legitimate, and they say, no, you're not covered. It's a debacle, but vision insurance is way ahead of hearing aid insurance. And so, yes, that part is mostly going to be covered if the patient has, insurance.
Okay, Doug, I think we're going to wrap this up. Stephen, do you want to take over here?
Thank you so much, you guys. It's been a pleasure working with you. And Alan, I appreciate your inviting me back, and I'll see you all tomorrow morning.